Okay, so I'm a terrible YouTuber, but I've got an audience here, so I thought I'd give it another shot. Um, Today, my exciting plan is to talk through the various books that I read in 2025 and to ramble on, maybe just talk in general about writing styles and all sorts of issues. And I'm not going to edit it because I'm too lazy. So uh, if someone interrupts me, if the light falls down, whatever, we're going to have to live with it. So here we can see it's a record year for me, and I have read about 18 books. There's one down here which I was reading at the time of this post but have now finished. And yeah, so that's probably about 50% above my average, partly because a lot of them were old ones which were very short. Um, Back in the day, people wrote really short books, which explains how Michael Moorcock knocked some of these off in anything between 3 and 14 days, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. So the first one I read was, and I need to scroll down a bit, A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stewart, who I met at Worldcon in Glasgow, and he's an incredibly likable chap. There's some people who just come up to you and there's a kind of chemistry or magic, and you just know that, and I'm sure it applies to everyone they meet. It's not targeted at me. Um, but yeah, you just be friends with me. He's a really good guy. Um, and the book was good. It's self-published. It did I think it was a semi-finalist in the SPFBO when it entered. Um, it's a bold book because it involves a really quite dislikable protagonist, and this isn't just because he does terrible things, but it's also because he's just not very likable. He's he's a sort of warts and all, greedy, ambitious, arrogant, and some people like me will when they write a character in this vein will try and leaven that by maybe giving them a sense of humor or something like that, but this one really didn't have any redeeming features, and yet it was an interesting tale because he's faced with many trials, and it's interesting world building. Yes, give it a go. Sandman Slim was the next one. I've been hearing about Sandman Slim for years, and it's I think it's some 20 plus years old. I read another book by Richard Cadre, and I could tell he was a good writer, but it didn't really do it for me. And Sandman Slim, I personally have this weariness with the that kind of trope of angels and devils and a human in the real world who's being pulled around between them and has magic powers. It's a thing that's turned up a lot. Um, and I may be being unfair to the book because it being a quite old book, it may be that it was far more original when it came out, and has had many um, things in the same vein, maybe things even inspired or copying it. Um, he has a good first person voice with a sort of hard boiled noir detective feel to it, and he captures that well, and it's got good energy in it. So it was certainly wasn't a chore to read. And if that's sort of thing appeals to you, then I think this is probably a very good example of it. Um, and it was just fighting an uphill battle with me because of that sort of weariness again. And it's the same thing with covens of witches and vampires in the real world. You'd have to be a super incredible world beating writer to write that sort of thing in a way that would fully engage me. I enjoyed Buffy, but that was a long time ago, and there's just been an ocean of that sort of stuff coming in ever since. Next was Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, which was 5 stars all day, a really good book. It is my least favorite Christopher Buehlman book, but that is to say that it is one of my favorite reads of the year, and way above a whole bunch of other authors, because Bjorman just hits that sweet spot for me. He's got wonderful prose, it's emotion in there, um, and a sort of depth of kind of realism and humor. I don't know what it is, but it's just really, really good. But I did prefer The Daughter's War and The Black Tongue Thief. Um, this one's kind of set in medieval Europe, and it again a bit like the Sandman Slim one. It has angels and devils on the go. Um, so maybe that was why, although it's 5 stars, it's less of a 5 star than those other two truly wonderful books of his. Um, next one, it's hard to read on this graphic, is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Um, it's magical realism. It's quite similar in character to Little Big by John Crowley, which I read last year, which is also a kind of magical realism one. Little Big sort of leaned a bit harder into the fantasy, and this one leans a bit harder into the realism. And it's highly praised. I mean, it's put on a literary pedestal and given all these plaudits. And yet, for me, it was a big, long list of stuff that happened with very little motivation and extreme personalities doing weird things, and the sort of magical part of it had almost no impact on anything, and was kind of instantly forgotten. I mean, early on there was people flying around on a working magic carpet, and yet about 100 years later in this family's existence, one of the people involved is training to be a pilot, and nobody ever mentions the flying carpets. It's all this magnificent flying machine, and let's put some money into that. So yes, it was a bit the same with the John Crowley one, though I felt more resonant themes in the background. We both talk about generations of a family, a sort of large rambling family, and maybe 3 or 4 generations, and aunts and uncles, and marriages, and but it all's very rambling and unfocused. And maybe I'm a Philistine or too stupid, but it didn't really hit with me. Maybe if you went to university and studied it and were taught about all the parallels between the themes in the book and what was going on in the country on which it was based, presumably in South America or Central America, uh, there'd be loads to write your degree on. But to me, just reading it cold, I was disappointed. Mushroom Blues came second in this year's SPFBO, and I think it probably had a joint winning score, but maybe fewer favourites or something like that. It was incredibly close, and it's a very entertaining book, kind of a detective noir thing. Yes, in a sense, has an overlap with the Sandman Slim, except it's set in a different world with parallels to ours, I guess. And there's a society of people who are sort of partly fused with fungi, so a very fungal sort of uh, society, and then there's this sort of invading force that have um, stamped their authority across it and are now providing police services to look into murders. Um, and so it's this culture clash, and there's sort of bigotry and racism going on, and the unfolding of this plot. It's very well done. I was entertained. I enjoyed it. I think it was a good book, and without the book that beat it, it could have been a deserving winner. And we move straight on to the book that beat it, which is, hopefully I'm not obscuring it with my face, By Blood, by Salt by J.L. Odom. Oh, I met Adrian Gibson in a World Fantasy Con in Brighton this year. He's a very nice guy. Um, by Blood, by Salt by J.L. Odom did win. Some of the judges scored it relatively low, and a lot scored it quite high. And I think that is um, something that will be reflected by the wider readership, that it's a um, atypical fantasy book because there's almost potentially zero fantasy in it, um, apart from the setting is not the world. It's something like the world, but with sort of religions and cultures that you can find mappings to ours on, but not in that combination. It is not particularly action heavy. Um, there are potentially no monsters. There's a bit of confusion about whether one person or monster is a person or monster. But what it is, it's a very, very adult, but very grown up book. It deals with all sorts of themes of uh, prejudice and bigotry and culture clash, and it deals with them in a very sophisticated manner with excellent prose and observational skills. So it's character led. You are and the dialogue is incredibly effective and doesn't feel contrived, but it also manages to convey lots of uh, richness and feeling and develop these relationships. Um, and the why I say it's adult or sophisticated is that the person who is primarily the target of the prejudice and bigotry is not a paragon. They don't. You see this in a lot of books where, as soon as someone is being the target of prejudice, they are painted as being a wonderful person, and the people who are throwing the prejudice at them are painted as being sort of moustache twirling villains who have no redeeming features whatsoever. And this just looks at it in terms of well, they're all real people. None of them are perfect. Some are worse than others, obviously. But by making it not a case of black and white, but lots of shades of grey, I think it gives you far more insight into what's going on. And I am I run the risk of making it sound boring and over intellectual. It's not a boring book at all, but it's certainly not sort of your typical fantasy fireballs, things exploding, running away from dragons, that sort of thing. It's more literary than that. It's an excellent read, and you should read it. And over here on the other side is A Haunt for Jackals, which is the second book in that series trilogy, maybe, which I've also read, and is also frankly brilliant. And my favorite book of the year, spoiler, was By Blood, by Salt. Um, oh, and it's also kind of a what the SPFBO was designed to find. It's like without the focus that the SPFBO has placed on it, it could have been entirely overlooked. It had almost no reviews or ratings when it came to the contest, though it had only just been released. Um, and I feel that the contest is in many ways responsible for shining a spotlight on it and letting other people discover how good it is. Hopefully, it will reach that point where it starts to snowball and no one can stop it, and no one can claim any credit for its future success. But I like the idea that the SBFBO helped, in this case, bring a brilliant book to your attention, which you may never have seen otherwise. Next up is Hostile by Luke Scull, which is a horror novel, and Luke wrote the Grimm Company. I'm just going to sip some coffee here. He wrote the Grimm Company trilogy, which came out about more than 10 years ago now, which I enjoyed. But he's changed gear here and he self-published a horror novel, and it's a bit of a strange one, but good, very good. It's in the initial explanation, it sounds like one kind of horror novel, which quite a simple one but enjoyable, which is people's pets start going crazy and attacking them, which, a bit of a James Herbert, The Fog type deal. 1980s horror, maybe. And it turns into something more psychological and sophisticated that really starts to pick apart the main character through whose eyes we are seeing this. And there's some autobiographical elements in there. So it's actually quite a sophisticated book in itself, but certainly when you start reading it, you won't get that impression. You'll think you're reading something a lot more basic, fun, and by the time you finished, you realize you've read something deeper than that. Then I read, quite a contrast, the Handmaid's Tale, which is it sci-fi? Is it yeah, maybe sci-fi, post-apocalyptic. Um, but anyway, it's a very famous book by someone, Margaret Atwood, I think that says. Um, and yes, it's extremely well written. I wasn't sure what to expect from it. I was obviously I've been aware. I apologize for that. I've been aware of it for a long time, but never really looked too far into it. But yes, it's extremely well written. Atwood is a fine writer, and she picks apart this the people and characters in this kind of post-apocalyptic society where women's position in society has been the handle's been turned back a long way on it, and they're very subservient. And there's a class of women whose job it is to conceive babies with the male patriarch of these elite families and give birth to them. And our main character is one such lady, and it delves into her past and her future, and does an extremely good job of it. And it's yeah, it makes you angry, it makes you want to get out there and wave a placard around. So yeah, very worth reading. Next one I moved on to is an entirely different vein. John Scalzi. I read his Old Man's War and enjoyed that. This is the Collapsing Empire, which is about a galactic empire which is held together by all sorts of hyperspace tunnels or whatever. And these tunnels start shutting themselves down, and it's about um, initially controlling the release of that information because it's obviously quite a unsettling set of information that could have disastrous results on society. And I guess in future, as it goes on through the series, about the consequences of these shutdowns and the Galactic Empire devolving into highly separated parts. Um, it's got a lot of politics. It's got sort of one greedy sort of family guild trying to exploit the situation, and there's lots of infighting and murders and assassinations and whatnot. And it's well written and it's good fun. Um, Not particularly deep, but it's fun. It's got a undercurrent of humor in it, and it's a good read. After that, Daughter of the Otherworld by Shauna Lawless, and this is so there were three books in her sort of year 1000 Vikings and Irish kings on the island of Ireland, um, all their politics and fighting, and with Irish mythology injected into it, so that certain of the characters were these I forget the correct nomenclature, Tunaf Dan or something like that. They're ones who sort of have magical powers and extremely long lives, and they sort of move secretly through human affairs, influencing things. Um, and this is, I believe, the start of another trilogy that continues essentially the same storylines and with some of the same characters, but there's like 100-year gap. So instead of being in the year 1000, we're now in the year like 1100, and we've got Normans on the scene and slightly changed dynamics. But like those other three books, it's very well written. I'm saying this a lot, but and each of these, when I say, oh, this is really well written, it's often a different type of really well written. Like John Scalzi, um, for me, his prose isn't anything particularly to write home about. Um, but he has great storytelling and energy and dynamics. And Richard Kadrio's Sandman Slim, great sort of quippiness and excitement and sort of energy, and during that one first person point of view. Um, and others like Atwood are far more sort of great prose and literary skill to capture the dynamics of interactions in a way that makes you really believe in these people. And Shauna, again, has her own flavor of great writing. She's very good at building up relationships between people that you believe in, a bit like Robin Hobb. Um, Over time, continuing to invest you in them so that when things go wrong or right, you sort of are happy or sad, you're invested in the story because of the characters. Okay. I've had that George Martin book, Night of Seven Kingdoms, on my shelf for a very long time. It was sent to me when it came out, and I kind of sidelined it. And maybe I was waiting for the next for Winds of Winter, but I really should have jumped on it because it's a very good read. It instantly reminded me of all the stuff I love about A Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, and Martin's writing. And I believe in the coming year there's going to be a TV series. I didn't know about that, but it was coincident. I started reading it, and then all of a sudden, Facebook was telling me, "Ah, there's a series coming up." So I'll be watching that series. Keen to see what they make of it all. But it's a much more focused book than the Song of Ice and Fire because it's seen through the eyes of this one character who is a lowly hedge knight, and all the troubles he gets into as he sort of roams across the countryside, interacting with various nobles and whatnot. Uh, then there were some rereads. So Michael Moorcock, Jewel in the Skull, and The Mad God's Amulet were books that I picked up out of second-hand shops in the 70s and read as a teenager and loved them then, and decided to reread them. And Moorcock did write these things as pulp. He knocked them out, possibly with the aid of chemistry, um, in a matter of weeks, in sort of these creative rushes. And I think I've seen interviews with him where essentially it was, he needed to pay this bill, he needed to pay that bill, so he wrote this book, he wrote that book. So the fact that they've endured so long and people still talk about them is testimony to his skill. For me now, 40 years later, these books were written like around the time I was born, and I read them like when I was in my teens. Um, the main skill that Moorcock demonstrates in these books is just the depth of his imagination. There's a sort of a joyous riot of invention going on. In terms of the characterization and the dialogue and these things, they show how swiftly they were generated, um, and also they may be representative of the time in which they're written. And I'm going to maybe talk about that a bit more when I come on to Asimov. But some books written a long time ago have dated now. Obviously, if we're talking about ones, written in Shakespeare's time or uh, 300, 200 years ago, there's a huge filter of language that we have to go through. Whereas if we're talking about things that were written in the 60s, less so. But there is a filter of writing style, and whether that change in writing style represents an improvement in writing quality, which no one writer can lay claim to, but is a kind of inheritance that collectively people writing in their hundreds of thousands for decades and decades have found better ways of writing books, which we can now, as writers, all look at and go, oh, well, I'll write my book in that style and benefit from it. Um, that might be true. or it might be true that the style that they used 40, 50, 60 years ago was excellent and we're just no longer equipped to appreciate it. I'm minded to think that it's the former, that methods of telling stories have improved and expectations of the quality have increased. Um, and that we have a much larger pool of people who are able to actually get into print, so that the ones who succeed, um, just like the 100-meter sprint, has time has increased, not just because of better nutrition and training, but also because the pool from which you can draw on, the number of people who have actually the spare time to think, oh, am I a fast runner? Could I make a career of this? Has increased. Um, there's a degree of that, I think, as well. Um, but yes, I enjoyed rereading these. In places surprised by how much I could remember, and in other places shocked by how little I remembered. Wondering, did I skip this book? Have I ever read this one? Um, but they were fun, and yeah, if you just go with the flow and let that imagination wash over you, it's easy to be inspired by the worlds he's painting and the ideas. Then I moved on to Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, who I've read the 10 Amber books. I read the first ones back in the 70s, early 80s. And then I read all 10 of them more recently. I really liked the first few, and the quality kind of steadily declines over the 10, in my opinion. The Lord of Light, though, is written in a different style, a more sophisticated literary style. It's not a literary fiction by any means, but it does feel more serious, even though a lot of the stuff that goes in it's kind of jokey and fun. Um, the themes and the ideas are mature. It's a quality book that explores a whole bunch of different issues about. Well, I don't want to spend a long time taking it apart, but there's a lot of spirituality in there because these there's a long-lived group of people who, with the advantage of technology and mutation, are effectively gods to this planet. Um, and then there are issues of how they should or shouldn't guide this planet and what they can reasonably um, do in terms of the destiny of those massed people who are living and dying while they are up in their fake heaven, um, doing God things. But yeah, certainly now, as an old man, I find this far superior to the Amber books, though I did really enjoy the early Amber books. I read my first Robert Jordan book and my first Conan book for a very long time. I picked this up in a secondhand bookstall in the Brighton um, Fantasy Con. I had been asked if I was interested in writing a Conan book, and I wasn't really, but I thought, seeing as it's there, I'll pick one up and see, remind myself of what Conan books are like, and also take this opportunity to see what Robert Jordan's writing was like. And I think this was written quite early on in his career. And yeah, it feels like what I remembered of Conan, except kind of dialed up to 11 and with far more um, women as breast carrying devices in it. Conan had a lot of sort of spanking and sorting women out, and it's, I mean, yeah, it's fun sword and sorcery, and there's some cleaving of baddies and rippling of his muscles and demons and sort of banished to the outer hells again. Um, um, I don't know if it was more sexist than the ones I used to read by Sprague Le Camp and Lynn Carter, these inheritors of the franchise after uh, the original. Howard died. Um, I feel maybe they were, maybe those ones were slightly less sexist than this one was. Did dial it up a bit more. Don't know, but yeah, for me, the issue with writing Conan books is that um, he's so well defined, and I don't think these um, any call for changing him, and if you're not going to change him, then it's really just more of the same. You could kind of write one on autopilot, um, but I don't see the point. And finally, well, not finally, because there was the Nick Binge book was plugged down the bottom, but finally on this little tableau, the Asimov book, The Stars Like Dust. I've read Asimov books before and enjoyed them. Foundation, iRobot, but not for a long time. This was a pretty bad book, to be honest. The dialogue was very stilted. The plotting was there's a really painful bit about the American Constitution at the end of it. Um, when you're trying to judge very old books, and this one again was written, I think maybe before I was born, and that was a long time ago. And it's also got like computers in this is set like 1,000 years in the future, and there's a galactic empire, and but the only sort of high tech stuff is the ability to bounce between planets. In order to bounce between star systems, in order to do that, you need to do some calculations for your hyperspace jump, in which they use computers, and that is the only time they use computers. And the computers slowly, over the course of hours, calculate these with they're essentially glorified slide rules, calculate the jumps required. But nowhere else is there anything that's as sophisticated as a mobile phone or um, that does anything apart from, in computing terms, add up some numbers. Um, People are sort of smoking and behaving like they were in the 1950s. So it feels very dated. And again, the woman there is well, there's the main character and his love interest are both in their early 20s, but behave like they're about 13 and in the school playground in terms of this romance that they have, which is um, feels rather silly and juvenile. And yeah, uh, even the ideas. I mean, like Foundation had some great ideas about the sort of psycho mathematics that was to predict the course of civilizations. This one didn't really seem to have any ideas in it at all that were particularly exciting. It was just sort of the bad guys who are having a bit of a empire build across a collection of planets, and we're going to fight them. And the bad guys, very on the nose, are called the Tyranny. Home planet is helpfully called Tyran, but they're a tyranny. So yeah, I don't think it was one of his best, put it that way. And finally, I've just finished Ascension by Nick Binge. His publishers sent me the arc of this a few years ago when it came out, and sadly I slept on it. So this was the first time I got around to giving it a go, and I was again impressed by the writing. And again, I've said this a lot, and and again, he's got his own way of doing writing well. There's lots of this is my criticism of this book is it's not really a criticism. It's simply that the sort of general form of it I have seen before, where something really weird happens. A collection of scientists are brought together. They're all saying hi, like in the helicopter there or whatever. Oh, I'm so and so the biologist, and I'm so and so the geologist. I'm the linguist, and they you've seen it in things like Contact and other um, Sphere maybe um, situations, and then as our people sort of delve into this alien artifact slash spaceship slash, in this case, weird mountain that has appeared out in the sea. Um, we simultaneously um, unpick some sort of dilemma or trauma or something in that character's ground, and somehow this also helps us in unpicking the mystery. Or and it's familiar in that sense, in its broad strokes, but it's very hard to do well. And um, I think Binge does a really good job of that. Um, it's also very hard to resolve in a satisfying way because it's a bit like Lost. That you throw a lot of crazy shit out there and you spend two-thirds or three-quarters, or in Lost's case, 9/10 or 19/20 of the time thinking, how will they ever resolve this in a satisfying way? How will all these disparate elements actually make sense at any point? And for me, in Lost, that absolutely never happened. Um, and in most of these sort of, we've discovered some uh, alien artifact type of thing. Um, I found the endings not not really as satisfying as I would hope. Um, this does a good job of it. Still left with some rough edges and some, but I enjoyed the read. It was he captures the feeling of the environment, the emotions of the characters, some of the dynamics between them. Does all of that well, and he make good use of the prose to draw scenes and sort of deliver more than you should be able to with single lines. Um, I would definitely give it a read if it sounds um, like something you might enjoy. So there you go. That's my 2025 reading. Um, that's me YouTubing. Like and subscribe. Daughter of Crows coming out in March. You should pre-order that. Maybe I'll do some YouTubing in 2026. Maybe not. Right, I'm going to stop recording and see if any of this is at all useful.